Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this second episode of Perspectives on Sustainable Development. I'm your host, Chris Whitehead, and today I'm really excited for this chat. I've loved having this project over the last couple of years, just as an opportunity to frankly learn more about topics I really am passionate about and topics that I think are important for our society to talk about more and topics that frankly don't get enough attention, that if we are willing to engage on them now and objectively talk about them now, it's going to help a lot in coming years. And I try to take on challenging issues that I think are important, that affect a lot of people. And anyone paying attention to current events nowadays will find it hard to turn on the news or open a paper. Even no one gets papers anymore, I suppose. So pull up their phone and not see a story about immigration or about the various ICE raids and how they've affected every corner of American life. And beyond the graphic images and just absolute lack of tactics and compassion and respect for others that we saw and have seen numerous times, unfortunately, with ICE in Minnesota and all towns throughout the country. There's a human face to immigration, and I think it's important to first understand on a fundamental level what's driving folks to decide to pick up and leave home countries that they love to come to America, a country, I'll remind you, was built by immigrants. And just to be 100% transparent, taken from people who were living here before us. I love this country with everything in me, but to do that, to do it justice and to do the American dream and American promise justice, I think you have to also be transparent, be honest about be honest about things that are going on, and try to do your part to move the needle a little bit to actually make our country and our society a better place for everybody. And that equity piece has been honestly what's been driving me in my work for the last, I don't know, 7 years or so. And today we are going to be talking about immigration as a climate change issue. And one of the things that has driven a lot of people to come here over the years, and I think will be a bigger issue going forward, is that the homes the countries they're from, the homes they know are being impacted more by stronger storms, by flooding, by excessive heat, whatever climate impact you want to talk about. And it's just getting worse. So their everyday lives are getting more challenging and they want something better for their families. So they might choose to emigrate to our country through whatever means they can and come here to try to form that better life. And oftentimes, send money back home, help out however they can, or put their time and academic talents in to improving to actually improving livelihoods back home. And today we're lucky to be joined by two experts in the field, one from the Philadelphia area who I know pretty well from local efforts, and another who actually be calling in from another country today, Spain. And they're at different points in their professional development, but each taking a very, very interesting and I think important perspective on these topics. So without any further ado, we have Carlos Bosell and Daniel Gonzalez. If you can both come on camera and sound, please.
Morning, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. And actually, I was joking about this before the call, but because he's in Spain, it's actually afternoon for Daniel.
Yeah, but still, a lot of morning clients that I speak with. So I've gotten a lot of good mornings today.
Fair enough. Um, I intentionally didn't go into either one of your biographies because I think you each tell it better than I ever could. So, Daniel, you want to go first, maybe, and just give the high level bullets?
Yeah, so my name is Daniel Gonzalez. I am the founder of D Journeys, which is an advisory firm within energy and climate organizations, focused mostly on strategic consulting and also some partnerships and program work. Um, I've worked in climate for about 6 to 8 years, depending on how you count it. But I am originally from Colombia. That said, I spent most of my life in the US when I was younger, and then also did my undergrad and my master's in the US and worked in the US. Um, I'll leave it there because I know we'll get into more details for both of our stories. But Carlos, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Everyone that's listening. My name is Carlos Clausel. I currently live in Philadelphia, but I'm born and raised in Puerto Rico. I've been in the climate space for about 10 years. I'm trained as a civil engineer and an architect, and I used to work in that space, transportation engineering and urban design and planning. But decided to, out of personal reasons and out of the economic crisis being so clear and so a threat to humanity, I decided to transition from that space to work that is still aligned in different ways to engineering, design, development, but it is very much seen from approach from a climate lens as well. I work with a global or environmental organization around climate action, and also I volunteer. I'm part of different boards that focus on climate and the environment here in Pennsylvania. And thank you for having me.
Absolutely, my pleasure. I think I want to get the conversation started today with a general topic I introduced a bit during my introduction before the reasons why people choose to emigrate to this country or to other countries, generally speaking, wanting to find a better life for their family. And oftentimes it's those economic and social issues and potentially safety issues that can drive that type of a choice. So I just wanted to open it up with that and ask if either one of you have some thoughts or comments on that.
So for context, I have lived in 4 countries. I have lived in 11 cities, and each time I move, there seems to be like a different reason. And so I think it wouldn't do good to say like, oh, there's been one reason every single time. But some of the things you mentioned are true. Like sometimes it's economic. You have higher salaries in the US compared to Europe and compared to Colombia, where I'm from. You have different educational opportunities as well. You have different ways of living. Uh, the US is typically very career driven, career focused, and that's like what makes part of the US. Um, Colombia and Europe are different in that regard. Access to capital. I mean, there's so many different reasons why people come in and out, and then sometimes back in again. And so I think it's kind of on an individual basis when it comes to professional immigration, and then when it comes to more climate refugees and climate migration, that's a whole separate topic. And maybe Carlos, you can talk about some of that.
Well, I will say that, climate migration is real, and it's and the people, families, the communities that are have to migrate because of climate and economic conditions are are in a terrible position. I and I in that sense I recognize my privilege in certain in terms that I've not experienced hardship in that way. Um, but my migration from Puerto Rico to the U.S. was due to climate. I relocated to the U.S. Puerto Rico, in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. And the reason I chose to do it was a professional reason, but more mission driven. When you grow up in Puerto Rico, you're used to storms, hurricanes, you're used to these things. But what we as Puerto Ricans experienced when Hurricane Maria hit was something that we've never experienced before. And it was a personal lived experience in understanding that climate change exacerbates natural events that we sometimes label as natural disasters. And that thing was unique, was something like we've never lived before. So my decision came after that experience to relocate to the US, to be closer to the action, as I call it, to really translate the climate related work that I was doing in Puerto Rico and relocated to the US because there was an opportunity to be part of an effort that had not only national but global could have national and global impact. So that was my motivation to relocate here in 2018. And since then, I've been part of the climate movement, climate work. So almost 8 years since I've been here. So it is a climate-driven migration, but I recognize it's different from countless families and people and communities that are migrating out of extreme survival. In the case of Puerto Rico, the migration from is in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria has been significant. Over 100,000 people, I believe, have migrated to the U.S. because the conditions for some of the communities in Puerto Rico, which is the poorest jurisdiction within U.S. jurisdiction, has been a huge impact. And when you think about climate, is also understanding that the deaths, the unfortunate deaths that we had in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, were preventable, but were also climate related. The hurricane collapsed the power grid in Puerto Rico, and you don't understand the impact and the importance of having access to energy from a health standpoint, from a survival standpoint. And those were one of the key drivers of the unfortunate deaths we had in the aftermath. People needing health and having health issues, not being able to go to the hospital, not being able to get access to insulin, not being able to feed themselves properly. So those things are also related to climate migration and climate impacts. And that is something that has been very personal, from not only from a work standpoint, but also from a personal standpoint.
No, that makes a
My
lot of
reasons
sense
to
for
migrate.
sure. Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense for sure. And what something you said kind of jumped out at me a little bit, and I was thinking a bit about the capacity to respond after these storms hits, and it takes a lot of economics and takes a lot of manpower and the will, frankly, and all those pieces have to be together and oftentimes for longer than folks imagine. And something else you said kind of jumped out at me. You emigrated from Puerto Rico to the United States, though obviously it is part of the United States, but doesn't get treated like that often. Do you feel like, I'm not sure how to put this, it gets the level of respect and attention it deserves as part of our country?
Well, Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory. Some would argue a colony. Others would argue against it. Um, but I think that there are from early rulings on the if you go back to the insular cases and the decisions around the Supreme Court with its territories. I believe the term is we are legally seen as foreign in a domestic sense. It's true that we are U.S. citizens, not by it's not a constitutional right. It's a federal law. That's my understanding. I'm no lawyer, but so that it's a complicated relationship. What I will say is that whether it's Puerto Rico or some states that are also closer to the tropical region, like Florida, like the South, climate impacts and the threat of migration is pretty evident and real. And I lived through Hurricane Maria, and I remember I can't go through something like this again in my life. This is something that is so um, so hard to experience and to deal with.
Yeah.
Uh, and not only Puerto Rico, our brothers and sisters around the Caribbean, the south of the United States. It's it's one extreme event. Uh, you know, one extreme event happens, and and the impacts, the effect to the livelihoods, to health, to the life of millions and millions of people is something that it's really hard to understand. That we are not ready. We're not ready to address this just yet.
On top of that, too, I think I would argue that our immigration system as a whole, and I don't like the dichotomy legal versus illegal because I don't think it's used properly, or well, there are a lot of problems there, but I started focusing on this issue for a lot of reasons. But from a climate perspective, I believe in coming years, the United States is going to get larger push of people coming to this country trying to find better opportunity because of various things that are happening in their home countries. And we've been over that a little bit. But Daniel, you come from an interesting perspective, studying here and trying to go through all the legal mechanisms, but still running into some troubles as well.
Yeah, it's true. The list is almost endless in my head now. Like, I don't know, I can give you at least like 20 to 25 situations where I'm like, it shouldn't be this way. And you know, I think the highlights or lowlights maybe is that I entered the US to do my undergraduate degree at Lafayette College in Pennsylvania. It's a small liberal arts college. And I did engineering, international affairs. And I thought to myself back then, I was 18, 17, 18 when I came from Colombia. And I thought to myself, get your education and then it'll figure itself out. Well, it's been almost a decade plus long battle where I've gotten my education and it's still not completely clear what the path is. And I think that's the main issue that you'll see most people talking about is like there's no real easy path. A lot of the paths that exist right now just take a very long time. And I've spoken to US citizens who just think that if a company sponsors you, then you can get you can get US citizenship. Or if just like things that just aren't really the reality. And so that's one low light. I mean, I could speak about this for a while, but the main point for me is the US has historically been a source of inspiration for a lot of countries, and not just in science and innovation, but also, like I mentioned before, in capital, in new tech, and even societally, culturally, you know, US movies and music are like transmitted across the world. And so it's been embedded in a lot of people's lives. And so you sell this promise to people to come. And then when you arrive, you realize that like this promise has a lot of cracks in it. There's some truth to it because there's absolutely no way that I could have gotten to where I am right now in my career without the US. I'm completely cognizant of that. But it's taken longer and it's been harder than I think it's traditionally than it should be and what it should like what the US sells. Um, so so yeah, I think that's again, there's a difference between coming in as a F1 visa holder, an international student versus a climate refugee or undocumented. There are very one of the first things that you realize is like the world of immigration is so complex, and there's like seven. I don't even know how many visa types there are, at least 20. And so each one of those deserves like a different story and is a different pathway and all of that. But um, yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm coming from. Another thing I'd like to mention here is that it's the US can hold on to this talent for only so long until the cracks really do make it so that immigrants don't want to come to the US as much. And a Wall Street Journal actually reported that there were more people leaving the US last year than people who entered the US. And that's the first time that it's happened in decades. And it's not just immigrants, it's also US citizens leaving, for other places. But I think there's a danger, and I don't know how soon this might happen, but there's a danger that a lot of the immigrants that have powered the U.S. economy choose other places to go to, and I don't think the U.S. has recognized that, and that's for someone who loves the U.S. as much as I do, because I really have spent most of my life there. I think that's something that they're going to have to reckon with at some point.
That makes a lot of sense. And just looking at it from an employer perspective, owning my own company now, I'm toying with the idea of hiring my first employee. And the most important thing to me is skill set, knowledge, passion. A lot of that talent is potentially looking other countries now. And there are a number of constraints across sectors in the United States and things like supply chain, major development projects. Um, we have challenges already, and if we see a exodus of skilled talent to other countries, partially due to immigration status and difficulties, I think that's a huge issue that not enough people, frankly, are talking about. I want people in this country who are going to contribute to society, be passionate about what they do, go after academics of what they want to learn more about, and choose that way to contribute. It's going to sound like I'm proselytizing here a little bit. The skin color doesn't matter to me at all, and I don't think it matters to most people. But the system just isn't functioning properly right now, and I think that's a bit of an understatement. Do you guys have any thoughts? And I know you probably go off for a while now, as to some tangible changes or improvements you would like to see.
I will start by just reflecting on what Daniel shared. There are a lot of cracks, and there are a lot of policy gaps. There are a lot of processes that are not great. And I think climate change, the way it's exacerbating all the natural events, is creating terrible conditions for humanity. Uh, and it's also creating bigger cracks within those policy gaps, within those processes that are not well baked for different reasons. Uh, so when we, for example, lose great talent like Daniel, anyone that follows Daniel and understands a bit about his career and his expertise, uh, clearly knows that he's a tremendous talent. And but like to think that climate migration is not necessarily people that live through an extreme event like I did, or others that had to migrate, for the hundreds of thousands of people from Puerto Rico had to migrate in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. Climate change doesn't show as climate change to your doorstep. It shows as an economic issue. It shows as a widening of a crack or a gap within policies and processes. It shows as talent leaving because of unfortunate policy conditions that a country or a government chooses to impose, and then climate change exacerbates all those elements. Climate change shows as a terrible environment to live in, where your personal health and public health are worsened because of air pollution, because of emissions, because of extreme heat. So those things will have a compounding impact and create these sort of stressors. Um, in terms of ideas around how to approach it, I don't think there's like one singular, or at least one singular idea comes to mind. What I do think is that climate change gives humanity the opportunity to address those cracks, to address those gaps, to think about humanity, to approach our policies, our practices, our way of life, even also our economic systems from a human standpoint, because climate change is not, we're not here. I always find it funny when we say we're saving the planet. We're not here to save the planet. The planet will continue to circle around the sun if we don't tackle the climate crisis. We're here to save humanity. We're here to sustain life in this planet by keeping planetary conditions for human life to exist, survive, and thrive. So it is. I always say that every job, every action, every policy is a climate policy, a climate action. It's related one way or another to climate. So addressing the the immigration policies, addressing economic policies, addressing transportation and mobility policies and processes and systems, protecting our environmental resources. Those things secure conditions for human life to exist.
On my end, in terms of maybe more like tangible, specific solutions as it pertains to, professionals living in the US or migrating to the US, there's maybe two or three policy recommendations that, if I could give Trump these policy recommendations, like this would be the greatest thing ever, or any administration, truly. One is just like the amount of green card. So Congress has set a limit to the amount of green cards that it can give out every year. And it's the same limit that's existed for, I think it's 30 years now. I don't know. It's been a long time since anything has changed with regards to this. And so there's a backlog now of people who are applying for these specialized visa categories where they show that they're talented and that they have a lot to contribute to the US, but they can't actually get their green card because in some cases, in the case of India, for example, like the backlog is more than 13 years. And so it's this limit on green cards for extraordinary talent. And I say extraordinary because that's literally what the US government calls it. Those are not my words, but it's extraordinary talent and talent in the national interest. It just doesn't make sense. So increasing that would be one of the biggest things. I also think that any immigrant who decides to have an education in the US should also receive residency privileges. You're spending a fortune sometimes. Sometimes it's scholarship, sometimes you're spending a lot, but to get your education in the US and um and then you have nothing to show for it outside of your diploma, which is important, but it's not like the diploma won't necessarily let you stay in the country. So I think that's a second piece of policy that I would advocate for. And then a third one, which I do admit would be much more like the first two are already hard to put into Congress. Like Congress might never do this. But the third one, I do think a special status for climate refugees, creating that would be really interesting and support a lot of the people who are experiencing some of these extreme weather events and climate risks and whatnot. But that's definitely right now just a wish, far from becoming a reality.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And just want to tell a very quick story as to how I first met Daniel. I followed him on LinkedIn for a couple of years, probably before I even first reached out. Chatted a little bit here and there, and then at one point last year, your status changed, and you had to find a job very, very quickly. I forget the exact timeline, but it was something like 30 days, and just the outpouring of supports and comments and people blasting this to every corner of the world jumped off the page at me for evidence as to that extraordinary talent, just to use the term before, that is obviously evident in you. So I thought that was amazing and impressive, but also perhaps probably rare that I don't know. I don't like how I'm going to say this part, but the average person is not going to get that type of support. So I just can't help but think that there are a lot of people being left behind here.
There's absolutely no doubt. And, you know, even just this week, I saw on, well, first off, thank you for the compliment from both of you
Absolutely.
now. So, like, maybe I should just join more podcasts because this is great. But I also want to say that just this week on LinkedIn, I saw someone who went to Duke, did a PhD at Duke, and studied like advanced cancer research, the type of stuff that you read their work and you're like, I kind of don't understand what's going on. Like I get the basics, but like I actually don't know what you do. Um, and I had spent, yeah, his entire PhD in the US at one of the most prestigious schools in the country, and his visa ran out. He's originally from China, and he wrote in his post like I would do anything to stay in the US because I've made it my home and whatnot. But he had like I think like 3 or 4 more days, and he had tried a lot of different things and what have you. And that's one story, but I've seen so many of these stories repeated time and time and time and time again that it's made it clear that it's not a once in a lifetime situation. Even in my life, like what the story you just recounted, it's happened twice already. Once right out of undergrad and the second time out of my master's program. But um in undergrad, I didn't have a LinkedIn presence. It was resolved in a completely different way. But I know it's not just me, and it's now a systemic failure. Like when you see the same problem repeating itself, not to one or dozens, but hundreds and sometimes thousands of people, you're like, okay, it's bigger than just one individual. It's bigger than it's like a part of it is a systemic problem. And part of this too is like the psychology behind migration and like the what you feel as an immigrant coming into the US. When you arrive, you're like full of hopes and dreams and saying like I'm gonna do my research and get a PhD, get my master's, la di da. And then you pour a lot of time and effort into being here, and then it's like what did I get? You know, what have I received for that time and effort? And again, these like this individual who's like doing cancer research, I'm just like this is talent that the US would want to keep to save people's lives, to support even pharma and like the health industry. And so that's on one side. I also think when it comes to the LinkedIn post that I made, I was really lucky that it went viral. I do think I've given back to the community in different ways, but it's also a matter of like sometimes the posts resonate more than others. Like even now, I'm posting quite often, and some posts no one sees, and other posts blow up just because I don't even know. And so I think it was a combination of luck and talent, but um yeah, that day, that whole week, I felt really supported by all the people that I had been trying to support in the US. And Chris, I know you sent me a message. I still remember that you were like, however I can help, like let's try to figure it out. And I received a lot of messages like that. And this is what I'm saying, that the US can be a place of such hope and people looking out for each other, and then other times it's not. And so it's like this impossible like back and forth about like, yes, I love the US, and then like, oh, these cracks, they're terrible. um so yeah, I'll stop there.
Absolutely. And Carlos, I want your thoughts on that as well. But can you also fold in something you said before that I found interesting, that climate change, although the obvious threats and challenges here, can also be an opportunity?
Well, when Daniel shares his personal experience and also references that other unfortunate story about losing such a great talent, I also think about like essential people are all around us. When we go to the grocery store, uh, uh, you know, there are people, oftentimes migrant communities, who make sure that you can go to the grocery store and there's food there. There's fruits, vegetables. They feed you. They feed you. They expose you to amazing and diverse foods, and give you a culinary experience that creates a different life for anyone. Uh, you learn their music, their culture. You celebrate. Uh, they build your homes. Uh, they fix your homes. Uh, they teach your children. They become your neighbors. Uh, and so your chosen family, your whole life, your economy, because the same way that you can have a job is also connected to different ways in which your output is also addressed or given back to you in different ways. Uh, our whole lives are connected to people that do essential jobs, sometimes recognized, other times not. But without them, we wouldn't be able to live. Uh, and when we think about migrant communities and the ones that work in agriculture, you take for granted that you can go to the grocery store first, afford food. Second, that food is going to be there, ready and ready for you to purchase it and consume it. Climate change creates an added layer to those things that are given, to the fact that you have fresh water and potable water at your house, the fact that you are able to live a life to a certain extent that is worth living. Uh, I think that when we think about the people that make sure that we can live a life worth living, and we consider the threats of climate change and how, on top of the policy gaps, on the cracks of the terrible processes and systems that are outdated, that don't respond to current scenarios and challenges we live in, and then we engage with policymakers and people that choose to double down on those terrible systems and policies, you are creating a little bit of a hell for everyone else and for yourself. And if you are not choosing to fix those wrongs, you are, sooner or later, now fresh water is not going to be accessible. You're not going to go to the grocery store. You're not going to be able to purchase, or you're not going to see food at all. So those are the things that climate plus all these added elements that we haven't fixed are create this really challenging conditions. I think about opportunities is, to me, has been really evident in the work I've been doing around climate, how how shifting the processes and the narratives and including communities, regardless of status, regardless of the time they've been in a given place, regardless of what they contribute. If you begin to engage with everyone and treat them as essential, you will you will walk farther. You will get there. You will achieve results. You will transform conditions, and you will improve your own personal life. Um, Things that have been very key more recently in the work I've been doing that are also connected to engaging around communities is, for example, thinking about benefits to local host communities, indigenous communities, as part of any sort of effort, transaction, activity that relates to climate change. Community benefits planning, community benefits agreements, meaningful engagement with communities turns often opposition, turns challenges, turns lack of resources into opportunities, into real results. It can turn a project or an opportunity or an idea that seems like we don't know how we're going to do this. All of a sudden, you see a path towards economic development, community involvement, policy advocacy that leads to better conditions for communities and people. And ultimately, you can really connect those elements to actually how they benefit your life, create more economic opportunities for yourself and others. Losing talent, whether it's you know within communities that are part of the agriculture economy, or communities that help fix and build infrastructure and houses, to extreme talent like Daniel, who has to unfortunately, be elsewhere when he wants to be here, closer to the action. You're losing a lot of opportunities to really, really improve the livelihoods of oneself and others. And that's something that I think we gotta think about climate migration in all those layers, and we gotta think about like the opportunities that we're missing to make our lives better.
Can I jump in here actually with two comments? One is I don't think that our politics are as divided as we seem to think they are when it comes to some of these issues, even though on the news it feels like we're completely two different worlds between like Democrats and Republicans. I I was listening to a podcast with a Republican representative in, I'm gonna say it's Oklahoma, but I might be wrong about that. But somewhere kind of in deeper south. And he freely admits on this podcast that he is not in favor of deporting a lot of undocumented migrants because he says like our companies would go bankrupt, like we wouldn't have employees anymore. And so I that's the first kind of reaction that I hear from what you're saying, Carlos. I totally agree, the essential workers, but also I think it goes back to that question of like of the pathway of a like, okay, if the majority of people agree that um these workers improve our lives, but we have no direction in terms of like how to take all of that energy and move it, like move us to a certain like vision, a certain like step B after we get to that common base. And so that's one reaction. And the second one too is a bit on the last comment you made about me being in Spain right now and wishing to be in the US. I actually, I think part of me has, and this is a more recent reflection, and it has to do a lot with agency of like when you become talented enough, and I'm doing air quotes for those listening. When you become talented enough, I think I know that no matter where I go, like I could get hired to do like even if it's small projects, like I can get hired. It's now a question of like where do I choose to spend my time, energy? And maybe this is just the maybe I'm just saying something that every single like early to mid to senior level career transitionist kind of goes through of like, oh, I have hireable skills. But I think that now that I've been able to step away from the US and some of this immigration stuff, I've gotten a greater sense of agency for like what I can choose to do with my life. And that's why I founded D Journeys, right? It's because like, oh wait, now that I like in the US, I can give you an example of this kind of weird rule, which is you graduate from your master's program. I got my degree in environmental management from Yale, and you're able to run your own business for a year. And then after that, you're not able to run your business anymore on an F1 visa. There are some caveats and like exceptions to the rule, et cetera. But basically, that's the baseline. But if you're outside of the US, you can operate a US business. So essentially, right now, my LLC, D Journeys, is a US based business. Like I have an address in Wyoming. That's where it's based. But I can only operate it when I'm outside of the US. If I were to return to the US, I couldn't operate it anymore. And it's like, tell me how that makes sense. It doesn't. And it's things like this, and not just in my example, but I can, like I said, I can share many others where you're just like, if only these rules made sense, then I think we'd kind of come to a better understanding and we'd be able to like move people across the finish line, whether that's a green card, a citizenship, or just like, leaving the US, whatever the end goal might be. Um, so yeah, Chris.
Yeah, just thinking myself of the gymnastics involved in all of that. And I'm going to take a shot in the dark here, but you still obviously have to pay U.S. income taxes, right? Because you're a U.S. company, but you're in another country. So a little bit of irony there too. Um, Interesting.
Yeah, I'm still, it's called legal resident for tax purposes. So it's not a green card holder, it's not a permanent resident, but I am a tax
Oh
resident.
God. Um,
Some
Interesting. Yeah.
taxes.
Uh, Guys, I was just thinking a little bit here. We're starting to come up on time for the end of this session, and I obviously want to leave time for final thoughts and all that. But I also wanted to give you both time because I know you each dedicate a fair amount of your time to local advocacy and local support groups for a number of different organizations. So just kind of curious if there's one you want to highlight.
I can start before I should one that I wanna make sure to promote since we're based in Pennsylvania. I do want to say part of my work, as part of my work, um, we are engaging with global companies, a lot of recognizable brands that have, you know, manufacturing operations that are global, U.S., but also outside of the U.S. And those global operations and those supply chains are you know feeling for a while have been feeling the not only economic stressors of war, but also climate stressors. And at some recent instances, some of these companies have shared their concerns about climate migration impacting their suppliers' workforce. When you think about how essential workforce, talent, skill, and skill, I'm not talking about, like, I'm talking from like anything that it's like highly complicated, highly technical, to someone that can really, really, is a great baker and can really feed you. The skill is the skill and the labor is like the list of all those elements that we need to make sure that we live a thrive have a chance a thriving life. So their concerns is if climate stressors impact host communities where these workers are from and they migrate, then they lose really, really essential labor and workforce. You also understand that if you're not contributing to making sure that these host communities where these workers are from, that their livelihoods are improved, that their health, human health, public health is sustained, that they are trained and have an opportunity to have a decent and climate, secure environment, that migration is a threat. Therefore, productivity is worse. The products and the services they sell are impacted, and they might not even have a business if that continues to kind of evolve. So, addressing climate change is essential to economic system of the U.S. and all those opportunities, all those resources. The U.S. is the wealthiest country in history. Although all of that can go away for various reasons, climate change being one of them. So addressing community issues, um, um, prioritizing communities when you are addressing climate change, you are approaching climate change, even from an economic standpoint, not only because it's the right thing to do, but even when you're purely thinking about economics and the business side of it, is key to sustain a healthy and thriving economy. Um, and those are challenges and issues that we are working with. We're dealing with some of the companies that we engage with. Um, I will say one thing I will say about where I live here in Pennsylvania is one of the few states, there are maybe four, five, six, I'm not sure, states in the US which have environmental protection provisions within their state's constitutions.
I think it's four now.
Four.
Yeah.
Pennsylvania is one of them, stating that every resident of Pennsylvania has a right to clean air, clean water, enjoyment of natural resources. And within that state constitutional right, making sure that all those layers, human health, economic issues, energy access and affordability, addressing impacts to agricultural economy, protecting our natural resources, addressing extreme weather events exacerbated by climate change. All those elements connect to that constitutional right. I am happy that I'm a volunteer and I'm part of a great statewide organization, Penn Future, Citizens for Pennsylvania's Future, who is a leader, is a statewide environmental watchdog, is an affiliate of the National Wildlife Federation. And it basically embodies and works with other organizations to make sure that that constitutional right is sustained, that anyone that is not doing right about the environmental protections and the benefits of the environment and healthy environment to the residents of Pennsylvania has to abide by it. So I will promote this great organization, Penn Future. Is doing amazing work in the state of Pennsylvania. I will continue to do so. So yeah.
Absolutely, I'll second that. Daniel?
Yeah, I think most of the advocacy I've done has been like kind of on my own, quote unquote, like with the community, but kind of like just me pushing different thoughts and ideas. But in doing so, like I actually just started. I sent out an interest form, so I don't know if that's me starting it or just like gaining traction, but there's an interest form out now for a Slack community called Immigrants and Climate. Basically, my idea behind this initiative is to get people together who work in environmental and climate issues, who also come from immigrant backgrounds or supporters of them, to kind of have a place to just talk through things. Like it's kind of like emotional support group, but also everything else that comes with like dealing with immigration and the climate workforce. And the reason why is because when I came to the US, I would have loved to have a place where I can just ask my questions, get some feedback, vent. It's like a big one too. And just like talk through solutions with people who actually knew and have experienced the same things that I was experiencing. And that doesn't really exist right now. So yeah, I've gotten some interest there and I'm hoping to build it out and have been talking to some partners about doing this. And so that interest form is on my LinkedIn, and Chris, I can send you a link and you can put it on the description or whatever would be helpful. But
Sure.
yeah, I think that's an initiative I'm excited for. And hopefully we see more of these coming out from the US and elsewhere.
Absolutely. Well, we only have a couple minutes left, but I want to offer you both the opportunity for any final thoughts you might have. But then also, I always ask a variation of the same final question ever since the beginning of last year, when I found that I'm extremely proud that this podcast has been downloaded in almost 90 countries actually now, but possibly even more proud of the fact that our biggest demographic, around 35% or so, is young people, students, college, grad school, interested in these topics, possibly thinking about starting a job, or I'm sorry, I should say trying to find a job on one of these topics. If there's anything you could do, you could say directly to them, what would that actually be?
I can start. Well, as I said in the beginning, I'm trained as a civil engineer and architect, and even though I love my school years, I love training, getting an education in those fields. It wasn't until I shifted towards community oriented, climate driven work that I found a calling, and that I found a professional path and a personal mission. I always say I will be doing climate change work, related work, for the rest of my life. I think everyone will be doing that, whether they know it or not. So two things are whether you are aware that you are contributing or addressing climate change, or going against it. Um, this is something where you're aware of or not. It's up to you. But everything we do has it's going to be tied to climate change. But the fact that I've chosen to kind of like build a path around a climate related work has been so important to me, has kept me sane, happy as anyone can be, even in stressful times. And I, both from paid work and ability to pay rent and pay the bills and buy groceries, but also personal time volunteering work, all of those things have helped the professional side and the personal side, but also kept me fed emotionally, physically, and in many ways. So I encourage listeners to really, if you're listening to this podcast, if you're curious about this line of work and what it means, to really, you know, don't be afraid and go full force and get involved in addressing climate change in any way you can. It's going to be very rewarding.
Absolutely, well said. Daniel?
I wish I could have like one tip that would help every single person, but I, in reality, what I've found very helpful is to be a bit more introspective about your path and more intentional about your path when you can. So asking yourself, even if you don't have a perfect answer, but asking yourself the bigger questions about, what it is you want to do, and figuring out ways to get there has been critical. And then me determining, okay, I want to work here, or I want to do this, or I want to do that. But sometimes I found that people are just going through the motions of school and then finding the first job that they can find, and then, just like quite literally the motions. And some people do this really well and are very like self-reflective all the time, and then other people like think about their lives in that way maybe once a year. But I would encourage listeners, especially who are more on the early career side, to get just a clearer sense of, in an ideal world, if money weren't an issue, if there was no issues, what would your path look like? And then try to build from there.
Well, thank you both. I enjoyed this conversation immensely, and just also wanted to highlight the fact that, uh, honestly, for a very, very heavy, complex, impactful topic, we ended on hope. And I found a number of avenues for people who are listening to potentially take something positive out of this. So I think that's always a good thing. And for everyone listening, thank you very much as always. And our next episode is going to be a conversation with the New Jersey School of Environmental Conservation and talking about the importance of outdoor education for young people. So, with that, I will sign off and say thank you very much.